friends and colleagues, welcome. Good afternoon to you all here in beautiful Villa Moigné, and to all of you joining us, of course, online for this new edition of the Human Rights Conversation series, today co-hosted by the Geneva Human Rights Platform and Child's Rights Connect. My name is Domenico Zipoli. I'm a project coordinator at the platform, and I'll be your moderator and host for the next 90 minutes or so. Today's special, very special Human Rights Conversation is part of a series of events that take place regularly throughout the year, aimed at discussing contemporary issues and challenges, of course, related to the promotion and protection of human rights in Geneva and beyond. It is indeed a special conversation, as I mentioned earlier, as it can be seen by the many children and youth representatives here in the room, as well as on this side of the room as well. And it is a great pleasure to see such a young audience, perhaps the youngest audience we've ever had during such events. It doesn't mean that we aim at older people during these events, but it is good to see such young faces. And let me firstly thank wholeheartedly all children and youth representatives, as well as accompanying adults, of course, that have taken their time in their busy schedule to be with us today. And I say busy schedule, not many of you might know, but this event is a special event because at the end of our conversation today, the children in the room will be joined by the rest of the delegation of children that have traveled from all over the United Kingdom, and will hold their preparatory meeting in Villa Moigné, in this room, towards tomorrow's Committee on the Rights of the Child pre-session, ahead, of course, of the committee's review of the UK in May. So this is all very exciting. And the theme of today's event is, in fact, your participation, children's participation in the work of UN human rights mechanisms. Over the last decade, there has been a gradual increase for opportunities for children to be included in such processes across the UN system. And this has been possible thanks to, of course, to the important work of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, as well as ongoing advocacy from civil society, as well as other national actors, including offices of ombudsman for children. As a result, today, children may engage in the work of the UN human rights mechanisms in a variety of ways, largely through consultative, collaborative, or child-led approaches, both at the international and national levels. And such instances include during the Human Rights Council Annual Day on the Rights of the Child, during the CRC Days of General Discussion, during the CRC pre-session, such as tomorrow's opportunity, as well as UPR pre-sessions. So, how to strengthen child participation in the work of UN human rights mechanisms? What strategies can be adopted to institutionalize child participation in such processes? And what are the expectations, importantly, and barriers encountered by children and youth representatives in accessing the UN human rights system? These are the overarching questions that we'll be discussing today. And to discuss around such questions, I have the pleasure to have here with me an outstanding panel of experts representing specific international and national actors, as well as the direct stakeholders. And I'll just introduce you one by one, after which we'll start with the conversation. So Bragi Gudbrandsson, member of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and importantly for today's discussion, also coordinator of the working group on child participation of the committee. Ilaria Palazzi, Deputy Director of Child's Rights Connect, and we'll learn about the work of Child's Rights Connect in fostering participation of children in the work of the mechanisms. Bruce Adamson, Children and Young People's Commissioner of Scotland, as well as 5 children and youth representatives. We have Bo and Daisy, who are both members of the Scottish Youth Parliament. Arden and Omima, at the end of the table there, members of the Children's Parliament of Scotland, as well as Mahmoud, who is joining us online, not yet, who is the president of the Children's Forum Network of Sierra Leone, who will be joining us, we hope, from Freetown, Sierra Leone on Zoom. So the conversation today will proceed by me asking a series of questions to each of the panelists, in the order just mentioned, after which we will open the floor for questions from you. So, I think we can start off this conversation with Bragi. We can go by first names. I hope that's fine with all. Yes, that's perfect. So, Bragi, within your work as member of the Committee on the Rights of the Child and as working group coordinator in child participation, what are the most recent initiatives developed by the committee in order to support children participation in your committee's work, as well as in the work of the broader UN human rights system?
Thank you for that question, and hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. Yes, I thought I should give you first a brief sort of overview on the child participation work of the committee. As you know, the right of the child to be heard and to participate is thoroughly embodied in the Convention, Article 12. We have a separate general comment on child participation, general comment number 12, from 2009, so an old comment, but it's extremely important comment for not only the Committee on the Rights of the Child, but all the other treaty bodies of the UN and everyone else, states and other stakeholders. Now, we try to implement, of course, live up to those standards that are embodied in this general comment, with the very good help of Child Rights Connect, with the help of Ilaria and her team, wonderful people that assist us in engaging with children and young people at all levels. Now, you know that one of the main role, and the main role of the committee, is to monitor the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We, therefore, are obliged to engage children in this work. And that is extremely important. Therefore, we have developed a detailed working methods for the committee, working method for child participation in the reporting process. And these working methods, they govern our work with children from all over the world that either come to Geneva or are communicating with us online on the actual state reports on our monitoring of the implementation of the convention. And we have also set a set of rules, child safeguarding rules, for child participation to ensure the safety of each individual child that communicates with the committee, to prevent and safeguard against possibility of any form of harm to children arising from or during their participation in the committee's works. Now, this work is often done in collaboration with the national civil society organization. They support children, and of course Child Rights Connect is our partner in crime, as I mentioned. And this requires preparation, and of course it's a great work that the national civil organizations do at home in preparing children and helping them assisting them in their preparation to take part in this process. Now, I should mention in this context that we have recently submitted or put up a child-friendly website, which was open for children to access information on the convention. It's in sort of child-friendly language, and I hope that will in the future be useful in this respect. Now, we have a very detailed rules or guidelines on how these meetings with children are conducted. For example, the use of child-friendly language, following each individual meeting all the children receive individual certification of participation. And we have also decided to send them a thank you video to sort of underline how much we appreciate their contribution to our work. Without the participation of children, we cannot fulfill the standards embodied in the convention with regard to our monitoring work. Now, I want to mention a couple of other things that are important with regard to child participation. The first is the day of general discussions. You may know that the committee holds days of general discussions. It's on average every other year or so. And the aim of it is to foster deeper understanding of the contents and implications of the convention in relation to specific articles or particular topics. Now, in 2018, not many years ago, the committee developed the working methods for child participation in the day of general discussion. And it was wonderful to witness, as I have only been for a few years in the committee, the child participation in the last day of general discussion, which was 2 years ago, and was on alternative care, how children were engaged in all the work of both in the preparation and during the day itself. We had 2 teams called Cat and Yat. Cat, the younger children, and Yat, the young people, and they were so engaged in all the work from the very beginning. There were 25 from 19 different countries with very diverse background and life experience, of course, in terms of gender, age, nationality, and from different regions of the world. And they conducted a global survey. And there was almost 1,200 children and young people aged between 5 and 25 from all around the world who participated. And on the basis of this survey, they created this wonderful report, Make Our Voices Count, which was a detailed account on children's sort of perception of alternative care and on their views, which of course was very helpful in our work. Now, during the day itself, there were over 20 children that are young people with experience of alternative care who participated as co-chairs and panelists during the day of general discussions, plenary session, and the working group. And this was absolutely fantastic to observe and live and see how this all unfolded. And we have also, and that's the second part I want to mention to you. It is the making of a general comments. The committee issues general comments on a regular basis, which you may know of. We are now in the process of making general comment number 26 on the environment. And there as well, we have children extremely active in the preparation of this work. We have a children's advisory team from all over the world that is mobilizing children regionally, locally, and globally in their work. They have submitted questionnaire, disseminated questionnaire all around the world, and they have received over 7,000 responses from children from all parts of from over 103 countries. And this is a great material that is now being processed and worked and incorporated into the draft general comment. This is just an example of the work that we do and the emphasis we give to the child participation. I know I'm probably talked already too long, but I just wanted to say that there are, if you look at the sort of future, we are extremely interested in disseminating our work procedures from the Committee on the Rights of the Child with regard to child participation to other treaty bodies, to other committees. There are 10 human rights treaty bodies, and we would like to see child participation in each and every one of these treaty bodies. And we know that there is a long way to go. I just want to draw your attention to a wonderful report that was published last year by Save the Children. It is on child participation. And it goes through the whole UN body and examines the extent to which children have capacity to influence the work of these treaty bodies. And this report also contains a number of proposals to further children's rights within the UN system. And this is important, particularly if you look at the most recent statements of the UN, like the General Secretary call for action from 2021 and the summit for the future, which is designed for next year. You cannot find any references to children in these fundamental documents and child participation, and that is concerning. However, we know that the Secretary General is preparing now a document on child's rights mainstreaming within the UN system, and we are extremely hopeful that this will change things to the better. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bragi, for giving us an overview of the most recent initiatives, as well as, of course, highlighting a few of the best practices. I must say that the report that you mentioned, entitled "Together We Decide: Strengthening Child Participation in UN Processes," was published in December 2021, and we ourselves, in the preparation of this event, went through this report, and I must say it's an excellent report, not only for you, the stakeholders, but also for us academics that wish to enter a field of research that perhaps we haven't focused as much of our attention in the past. We've read this report, and it really gives a great overview of the different opportunities for children to participate in the different UN human rights mechanisms. So thank you so much, Bragi. Ilaya, turning to you. So we've heard about the best practices coming from a key stakeholder, of course, in this field, such as the Committee on the Rights of the Child. But in your opinion today, what are the main challenges that you see as global platform of civil society organizations that facilitate child participation in UN? So challenges that we see in different levels, meaning policy, procedures, mentalities, as well as some of the achievements that perhaps you might want to share with us.
Sure, and before starting to reply to your question, just let me say thank you very much for this opportunity. We are really glad to be here with all of you in the room, but also people online today, to talk about this important issue with child participation, which is really core to what Child Rights Connect does. We were there from the beginning, pushing, and not only supporting, but also pushing the committee to come up with standards, procedures, and we are still doing that because obviously it's an evolving issue. What I want to say in relation, to the most overarching problem that we see when it comes to child participation in the UN system is, or even beyond, I must say, is that child participation is not at all yet understood as a key element of a child rights approach. It's just, consider that something nice to have or in addition to, but it's not there yet, in terms of if you want to apply a child rights approach, then you need to, empower children to know and claim and defend their rights. So there's a lot of awareness raising that we need to do, and even more within the UN, where children's rights are simply not, a priority, a political priority when it comes to UN high-level, and this is why, we are ending up with the SG initiative, the initiative from the Secretary General around an important summit that is taking place in 2024, with a resolution that only mentions youth participation and not children's participation. I also want to say that children is the only group of rights holders that has a treaty, human rights treaty, but doesn't have a UN strategy. So this is, just a reflection of the lack of political prioritization. There's also widespread, narrative and understanding of children's as only like a vulnerable group. There's an old-fashioned way within the UN of looking at children as only a group of vulnerable people in need of protection only. And when you look at the expertise that is in the field, the UN people in the field, teams, you have child protection officers. You do not have children's rights experts, as opposed to human rights experts deployed, for example, by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So this also, gives this, is an indicator that a shift is needed. There's also a huge pushback, from states, but not only. And of course, the UN is made of states, but there's a pushback on children's rights, even to the very idea that children are entitled to human rights. We are still there. It's not, it's still an ongoing fight. In the context of the Human Rights Council, we keep hearing, for example, that children are not even, some states are just saying that children are not even entitled to civil and political rights during public negotiations of resolutions. So a lot to do still. Plus, there is a widespread tendency to think that, children's rights it's just the committee's business, right? And child participation as well. It's fine, there is the committee, there is UNICEF, the rest of the UN can just, focus on everyone else. No, it needs to be mainstreamed throughout the three pillars. And this can only happen if the UN opens the doors to children. Finally, there is a lack of procedures and resources, and so even if there is political will, and luckily there is within the system, and I can tell you because we as Child Rights Connect receive on a regular basis call for support and requests for support from different UN entities. We would like to consult children on this process. Can you do it for us? Well, we're a team of 5 people in Geneva, it's there's no funding for doing this. You just, it should come on the top of what we can do, what we are doing, which is absolutely not realistic and not sustainable for the UN to just rely on a tiny NGO like us. So more resources, more procedures, more political will, and then really a big push to mainstream throughout. Just a few dates to give you an example. What we have achieved with the committee is really amazing if we think of the whole evolution since the adoption of the convention. The first interaction between the committee and children took place in 1998. Okay, it's a very long time ago, and then it kept increasing. It's still increasing with a lot of, as we heard, practice that have been documented and set up. The first time that children took part in a UPR pre-session was 2018. The first time that we had a child panelist in the Human Rights Council was 2019. The first girl that engaged with the CEDAW committee was 2021. And the first time that the SESC committee engaged with children was 2022. So it gives you an idea of where do we stand, but you can also appreciate that between 2019 and 2022, actually a lot has happened. And a turning point has been what Bragi was talking about earlier, the 2018 Day of General Discussion on Children as Human Rights Defenders. A big delegation from the UK, a lot of children from the UK was there. It was amazing. It was the first time where, the UN heard from children, we are human rights defenders too when we come to you and engage with you. And so this has helped, the UN, or at least some part of it, to see children in a bit different way. So I think that, that was a turning point that also as Child Rights Connect, we use strategically to engage, to start engaging much more with different parts of the system. And I'm really happy to see Michael Windfuhr online, because we've been working with him and the SESC committee in this process around the general comment that the SESC committee is developing on sustainable development. So something where we had already a lot of consultations with children that had taken place around the SDGs that were already taking place. So we really used that to say, okay, it's time for other treaty bodies other than the CRC committee to also open doors to children and engage and start listening to children directly. So yeah, hope he can say a couple of words before he leaves.
Of course, thank you so much, Hilarion. In fact, I would have had an additional question, but perhaps because of Michael's need to leave the meeting a little earlier than the end, perhaps Michael, we can pass the floor to you in order to widen the scope of our discussion beyond the work of the CRC and, of course, of civil society to the work of the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Michael, if you can hear us.
Yes.
Yes, hello, Michael. Welcome.
I can hear you, but I'm not allowed to start my camera. This has to be done by you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the host is hindering me to start my camera.
Okay, let's see if we manage to do that. I'll send a WhatsApp to the team outside of the room. Let's see if we can manage. But you can start talking and hopefully
Maybe
we'll
I
see
just
you up here.
start, yeah. And well, I'm a member of the UN Committee on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, and as Ilaria has said, we came under the pressure from Child Rights Connect to take the issue of children's rights participation more serious. Yeah, we are working on this general comment on the relationship of economic, social, and cultural rights and sustainable development, particularly in thinking about what does it mean when we live on a planet with planetary boundaries, how we can think about the distribution of access to economic, social, and cultural rights to the enjoyment of these rights. Yeah, and while we were considering this, we had already a lot of exchange with the Child Rights Committee, which is developing in parallel a general comment on the environment or climate change and children's rights. So we are in an exchange with that committee, but we have never thought about really maybe going into this direction, having own children's consultations. Yeah? And on our general comment on sustainable development and economic, social, cultural rights, we had already held 5 consultations with adults in the different regions of the UN system with over 400 experts or civil society experts participating in this. And then we fell under the pressure of Child Rights Connect now, and we came into contact more in depth and thought maybe it would be good for us. That would be a moment where the committee could start in engaging with children's participation. And I will not talk long, but let me just say what we have done and maybe some of the problems we have achieved and where we would like to head. Yeah, I think at the end we organized 3 children's consultations. We had about 160 children participating in the 3 on different continents, or it was basically online. We had children and youth from 35 countries participating. Also, children with a handicap and other circumstances. They were in the age between 7 and 17. So you can see it was really children and youth which were participating, and we were managing also to organize all this in 8 different languages, depending on the consultation which we organized. Yeah, and Well, it was easy to say at the beginning, yes, we do it. It took us a long time to really realize this, yeah, because we also learn that we have to make our, let's say, thinking and consideration available in a format which allows children and youth to participate. Yeah, there was no child-friendly version of our covenant. We started to develop a version with Child Rights Connect, and then you realize that suddenly the UN says, but we have to make a check if the language is correct. So it needs a process in the UN before you can publish something like this. You have to consult your colleagues. You have no secretariat capacity to organize children's consultation because secretariats are scarce. They were willing, but had very limited availability. So we managed to get some support from Child Rights Connect, the University of Nottingham, the Friedrich Ebert Foundation giving us some money, and also my own German Institute for Human Rights, which were able to organize some money for this. Yeah, so that we could prepare also material for the backing of the process, which would be made available. Child Rights Connect has local groups in different countries with whom it was possible to prepare also children and youth to participate in our, let's say, events. I think that is very important. You can't just start an event with children. There needs to be a preparation in advance. So all this happened. And when we were diving into the process, it looked, okay, we do 3 consultations, but at the end, it was a real process. Yeah, we learned a lot. I think something the Child Rights Committee has already learned, that children's and youth participation is just more than just organizing 3 online meetings, yeah, as we normally do it with experts. And this was extremely interesting. It requires a different thinking of a committee like ours, which is not developed first in this direction, but it was extremely helpful also for us doing this. And maybe just to let you know, what was extremely interesting is we were learning not only to talk about, for example, climate change, the limited environmental capacities of a planet with boundaries. We learned a lot that children was from the beginning also explaining what are their own let's say, problems with realization of economic, social, cultural rights, access to schools, access to good schooling, access to housing, access to internet, access to a lot of opportunities in a way to realize their own life they are living in. So it's not only something in future which we can discuss, we have to combine the aspects. Yeah, what is happening today? What are really development opportunities or realization of economic, social, cultural rights, with the opportunity to think about what does it mean if you think it's sustainable in the longer perspective. Yeah? So, and these clear-cut outcomes which we had was extremely interesting for our committee. So having said this, we will take the input we got from the 3 consultations very serious. We will also document this. We also made after this a short video with those committee members who participated to show the children who participated how we are going to use the input we achieved. And when we have our first draft ready, it will be beginning of next year. We will also try to make another consultation with those children who has been participating in our consultation so that we keep them constantly involved. So this is maybe what we have done, and we have already the request from Child Rights Connect. What will the committee do next in children's participation? I think it's now on our agenda. Ilaria, I can confirm that we will discuss it in our committee, how we and when we can really do much more children participation. We believe it is a must for our committee working on the realization of economic, social, cultural rights to do it substantively and regularly. But we have to learn how to do it better. And I think we need also a good exchange with our partner committee, the Child Rights Committee, in considering this and find maybe common opportunity doing this. Let me end by saying thanks really to Child Rights Connect. It was an extremely helpful institution in facilitating and enabling us. Yeah? Doing this, you need this type of support institutions. But also, it was a very rich learning experience for us as a committee. Yeah? And hopefully we can really get our committee doing this on a more regular basis, as Iliada was demanding this from UN human rights committees or treaty bodies. Yeah. Thanks, maybe as my input.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. Unfortunately, we did not manage to see you, but we're delighted to learn of all the different initiatives that yet another UN human rights treaty body is developing in order to to achieve enhanced participation of children in the work of your committee. So thank you so much. And we have mentioned a lot of the work that different civil society organizations have been leading. We've mentioned, of course, Child's Rights Connect. We've mentioned the great report, and of course the work behind it of Save the Children. Let me also acknowledge the presence of the head of the Geneva office of Plan International here in the room, another organization that has done wonderful work in enhancing the work of children. I would reserve a question on what needs to happen next from a global CSO perspective for later on. But now let's now turn to another stakeholder from a national perspective. Bruce Adamson. So as said, Children and Young People Commissioner of Scotland, you've come here with a Team Scotland with you, together with, of course, the organizations that we'll mention in a second. But we're delighted that you could be with us, and in fact it is thanks to Bruce that this event could take place. We started conversations, invited by another colleague of Bragi, Professor Anne Skelton, and it is thanks to her that we've been in touch and that we're all here discussing child participation today. So Bruce, I'd have a question, a first question for you, and that is, as a representative of national institutions that are of course different from civil society from a formal perspective, could you explain to us a little bit the role of national institutions in facilitating child participation in the work of the mechanisms? Just as a brief overview.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks so much. And thanks to the Geneva Academy for both hosting this important conversation, but also for hosting the conversation that will come next with the children and young people from the UK coordinating the work for the pre-session. And it's fantastic to see so many of those young people here already for this discussion, and I hope you'll be part of the Q&A that comes next. The role of independent children's rights institutions, I always describe my job as the best job in the world because it's my job to promote and safeguard children's rights. I note that my colleagues, the commissioners from Wales and Jersey are in the room, so they'll probably fight me over having the best job in the world. But because we're set up by statute within our countries, but we're independent of government. So we have that power and status of being a statutory body, but the independence. And whenever I speak to children and young people, I say, you're my boss. I'm accountable to you. We're appointed by statute, but accountable to children and young people. And the work in terms of promoting and safeguarding their rights includes that bridge between the international legal framework, the human rights framework, and the implementation of that domestically, their lives. And so it's the best job in the world because we get to go out to the communities that children and young people live in, talk to them about what's important, and then make sure their voices are heard locally, nationally, regionally, and then really importantly, in UN systems as well. And that's really important when we think about the right of children to be involved in decisions which affect them. That's all decisions. So that obligation that exists goes right up to the intergovernmental organizations. And so I think the role that we play in terms of bridging between the international and domestic is really important. And the focus that we have on putting children's voice right at the heart of that needs to be right at the heart of the UN as well as what we do domestically.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bruce. And I know that it is difficult to stick to the 5-minute rule when discussing the difference between national institutions and civil society organizations and people that might hold PhDs on this, perhaps including myself, up until a couple of years ago. But I have a follow-up question to this. Could you provide examples of previous involvement in different UN human rights mechanisms by your office? We've discussed, of course, and we've learned of the treaty body system. The UN human rights system is broader. So just a few elements to that, please.
Yeah, great. And again, I'm happy to have a coffee with people afterwards and have a discussion around national human rights institutions and ICRIs and all of that. It's a conversation that continues. But the specific examples that we have, we've been really fortunate in our engagement with the UN through some really structured examples, like when we had young people lead our delegation to the Committee Against Torture, so a very serious structured committee with not a long history of engaging with young people, but actually they led our delegation. And we've had a number of young people engage with high-level fora and the Human Rights Council, but they tend to be quite adult processes. So we're asking young people to come into very adult processes and behave in the same way that adults do, very prepared speeches. There's been some really much more exciting, innovative work, I think, with some of the examples we've already heard around the Day of General Discussion in 2018 from the Committee on the Rights of the Child on human rights defenders, where there were a big delegation from Scotland who brought giant, colourful mural shields and were using art and creativity to engage with the committee, and actually had committee members kind of down on the floor explaining the art. And I think that, particularly with the focus on human rights defenders, was very exciting. And again, as we see with the pre-session work with the Committee on the Rights of the Child. But as Ilaria and I said earlier, it's got to be wider than the Committee on the Rights of the Child. And we've seen some interesting work around the environment, and then I'm glad that Michael was able to talk about the work they're doing on sustainability, because until we create the spaces for children to engage right across the UN, we're not going to achieve that mainstreaming idea. And so a couple of more quick examples of some of my favourite things is when we've actually had UN committee members and UN senior officials in Scotland, and we've taken them to schools, and we've had the chair of the Children's Rights Committee sitting on the floor with the Children's Parliament. We've had Anne Skelton, who you just mentioned, at a nursery with us, climbing through children's climbing frames and tunnels and things, having discussions with very young children about the work of the committee, and getting that detailed information that they can bring back to the work. And we also had Philip Alston, the Special Rapporteur on, former Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty, came to a school in Scotland, sitting on the floor using paints to discuss poverty and the experience. And then we brought some of those primary school children to Geneva, to the Human Rights Council, and they worked with Philip on his engagement with the Human Rights Council. And one of the things that they said to me, these were 10-year-old children, and they said, you keep telling us that the UN's ours, that we're part of it, that we've got an equal voice. Yet when they walked around the Palais, they said, we didn't see another child. And that really kind of struck me. They've said, you've all this rhetoric, and Philip's amazing, and the ones that come and see us are amazing, but when you walk around these buildings, you don't really see children. So, which is why it's amazing that we've got so many children and young people here. And so if you'll allow me to steal proceedings for a bit, I'd like you to really hear from the experts here. And so we've got 2 members of the Scottish Youth Parliament and 2 members of the Scottish Children's Parliament. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time having a bit of a discussion with them, if that's okay. And I'm going to start with the Youth Parliament members. So Daisy and Bo, how did you get interested in human rights and engage with your work as human rights defenders, as I see you in the Youth Parliament? Who wants to go first?
Sure. This is interesting because I was speaking to Bo about this on the train, and we don't see ourselves as human rights defenders. We think of titles like that as being reserved for these amazing, outstanding people like Greta Thunberg, or, you know, members of the committee that have such an impressive CV of kind of defense of human rights. So we don't see ourselves in that light. I suppose I've always been passionate about changing things, but it was the Youth Parliament that gave me the expertise through the staff team and the support to really channel that into something productive. To be honest, there's no inspiring story behind it. I almost didn't run for Youth Parliament because I had doubts about it. I worried about whether I'd be able to balance that work with my education, whether I'd be made fun of or even bullied for it. So there's not really any kind of incredible origin story. It just happened organically. But I think I'm just influenced by the world and the people I see around me, and things that since I've been probably 5 or 6, I've seen as wrong and wanted to change.
And Bo?
Mine is a similar kind of situation to Daisy's. It's almost coincidence, to be honest. I think most young people feel a desire to try help the world that they live in because they don't feel that they have a means to in certain ways, and they don't have the power to do so. So that's why it's so amazing that the UN are starting to look at how they can include young people. But as I said, I don't think they have the means to do so, and I saw Scottish Youth Parliament as a way to kind of gain those means and gain those abilities to be able to do that and understand how to do that effectively. And I think it was also a mixture of things like aligning at the right time, like I was starting to get a bit more confident and wanted to actually make a change, and I just saw the advert for it and decided to go for it with a bit of convincing from my gran, and I've never looked back since. Like, it's genuine, it's the best thing I've ever done, and the skills I've learned from it, like, I honestly, I couldn't thank the organisation and the people within it enough.
There's some brilliant, strong themes coming through there. Do you want to go now? Or?
No,
Okay.
past her, sorry.
No, there's some brilliant, strong themes coming through that maybe will come out further in the discussion. But the next question I had was around that you're now involved in the pre-session for the UK for the Committee on the Rights of the Child, which will take place tomorrow. Could you tell me a bit about how that process has been and what your hopes are for that process of directly engaging with the UN?
So we're so privileged to be in the position to be able to attend the pre-session and for all the support that we've had in preparing for it, but it has been hard work. I've been balancing school. Just a couple of weeks ago, I got an offer from university, from Cambridge, and I need 5 A's to get that place. So I'm missing 3 days of school to attend this, which isn't much in the scheme of things, but it's not nothing. So it has been a lot of work, but again, we're incredibly lucky to be in this position. I do feel, though, we were a bit surprised by how little time we had to speak. We get about 1 minute and 15 seconds each, and yet we're representing 1 million children and young people, so it feels like condensing a lot into a little amount of time. For the pre-session, though, I really hope that the focus will stay on children and young people and that we'll get a chance to say everything that we want to say.
Similar to Daisy, I think Ilaria touched on a very good point about 5 people can't represent a massive group of young people. Here you have 4 young people representing 1 million young people in Scotland within the space of 1 minute 15 seconds, which is really difficult to condense a life worth of like mistreatment into 1 minute 15 seconds. And as Daisy was saying, we've had at least 1 meeting a week during prelim time, which has obviously been a pressure with education. But I think we hope we receive feedback. I know, Braggy, I think, was that you discussing that, or Michael discussing that, saying that the committees gave feedback to young people, and I think that's such a valuable thing to know that your contributions are going towards something. So I really hope we all receive something like that and kind of follow up conversation. So if you like something that a young person said, mention it to them, have a conversation with them after. And yeah, I hope that the environment isn't overwhelming and that it's just generally a young person friendly environment. So there's time to take breaks. There's a safe space. So if young people get overwhelmed, they can take a break. They can do something about kind of feeling overwhelmed. And genuinely listening, so like showing that in body language, nodding, appreciating what's being said. And I think that like the end goal of this is to essentially for young people to feel and see the impacts of this meeting in their everyday lives and to make sure that what we've said has been passed on to Scottish Government as points for improvement. So.
Fantastic. And one last kind of quick question, I suppose, outside of the CRC process, what would your hopes be for the wider UN, given that there's representatives from other parts of the UN? Is there anything that you think that you'd want to add about what the wider UN could do? You've already touched, I think, upon it pretty well, but is there anything you want to add? Do you want to go first? Bob?
Yeah. I think time is a massive thing. Also going to young people's spaces, as Daisy mentioned previously, we are having to miss education in school to come to this, which obviously you can argue this is probably a much more meaningful way of education. But I think it's important to remember, though, that we still do have exams to sit to get into universities and things. So coming to young people's spaces, like Bruce was mentioning about coming across to Scotland, like we'd love to be able to come take you round and take you to places where young people are. Because if you want to gather young people's views, you have to go to them sometimes. And yeah, I think creating a more neurodiverse space as well would be good for young people with like neurodivergency, as crowded environments can kind of be difficult for them and busy environments. And yeah, I think more time to speak as well is the kind of main point on that as well. So yeah.
Great, thanks. Daisy, did you have any other?
Yeah. So just on Beau's point about coming to us in Scotland, I know some committee members have in the past, and I've heard brilliant things about that. We as for young people, we cannot represent everyone. We can only represent our experiences, but there is a wealth of very diverse experiences in the UK. And if you come to us and visit different places where children are, you'll be hearing from such a range, and it'll be so natural and organic. And also just come up and speak to us. Like, we're here, this is an incredibly exciting experience for us, and we'd love to talk to you. So, yeah.
In terms of like when you're, thank you, in terms of when you're like listening to young people and these things, is remember is that although this is your kind of everyday job and this is normal to you, this is a massive deal for the young people that are attending, and they've put so much effort into that. So like make sure that you're appreciating that when you're speaking to them and engaging with them, I think is a big thing to keep in mind.
Brilliant. So that's two amazing young human rights defenders, and now here's two more. And I think that, again, it's really important to recognise that often when we talk about children and young people's involvement, we're talking about older children, and we're often talking about youth, maybe even young adults when we talk about youth. But actually the voice of children within the UN system is really important and distinct as well. And so coming to the pair of you now, how did you get involved in the work of the Children's Parliament and interested in human rights and being a human rights defender?
Do you want to go or do you want me to?
I'll go. I was kind of put forward for Children's Parliament. I was in primary 6, so I was about 9. And Children's Parliament came to my school, and we got about 3 people from each class. And we were put in this big room with it was like one of the rooms in our school. And we had like these 3 or 4 members of Children's Parliament, and we had this small half-hour meeting. And then like maybe a week later, my teacher came up to me and said, by the way, you've been picked for, along with 2 different people in our school, and they want you to be part of this big project on online safety for young people. And it was a bit overwhelming, but it was also like came really naturally to me. I kind of took it in my stride because I've always been like a very opinionated person. Which is probably why I was put forward for that. I think the teacher had enough of me. She was like, go do this. Also they spoke to us about children's rights, which I had been aware of before, but I hadn't really thought about them much, and they're not something I come across in my everyday life, which probably should be a little bit different, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important point, and this is the audience for it. Arden?
Hi, my name's Arden. Children's Parliament, came to my school when I was 8 or 9, and they started talking about children's rights. I had never heard of this. I was like, what on earth is this? I have an opinion, that's great. And they did a workshop with us, and they sat us on the ground, and for one of the first times that year, it's like, at the end of the year, we sat down and painted, and we didn't do much arts and crafts at school. And they brought in these big shields, they sat us all down on the floor, and we got to paint what we thought a good community would look like, where we'd feel happy, healthy, and safe. And I then got asked to be part of a project called What Kind of Edinburgh, which was all about what children's involvement in the community looked like, whether that was with services, educations, youth clubs, and how we could incorporate children's rights into that. And that was the first thing I did, and from there I've just continued because I really enjoy it, and it's one of the only times I get a proper say in what goes on about my daily life.
And so then, what does good participation look like? So what should the people here be thinking about taking away in terms of what good participation looks like? What types of things?
Sorry, you wanting to go first?
Well, I think Children's Parliament do a very good job of making us comfortable whenever we're coming to meet and talk about what we think and things like that. They never make it too formal or anything, especially when things are formal. I was really young when I started. Obviously, me and Arden were 9ish. So if we are sitting in a room with these important people and it's a meeting thing, it can be really intimidating, and it can quiet you down a lot because you feel like your opinions aren't as valid as the adults in the room, or you feel like some of the stuff you wanted to say was silly or not worth it, or you're not going to sound smart enough, or etc., 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 and you're really worried about sounding like an adult when really they want to talk to you as a child.
Absolutely. I think that's...
Yeah. So I think a huge part of making us comfortable as well is to get rid of the hierarchy, especially in schools. There's a very set way. The teacher is above you, or that at least that's how it happens in my school. You know your place. You're below the teachers. You're below the PSAs. You're not treated as an equal. It's very set in stone that you are below. Like, they don't trust us to go to the toilet and things in class. We have to go and break a lunch. We're not allowed to go fill up our water bottles. But we're expected to trust them to prepare us for the future when they won't trust us to go to the bathroom. And I think it's also to make it conversational, like two ways, and to make us comfortable as well, make it where it's not judged. We're entitled to our own opinions. Where in school, it's very set what we're supposed to think like. Where at Children's Parliament, they set you down and they say there's no right and wrong. They give you both sides of the argument, and you can decide for yourself what do you think is the best way to go around it, what do you think would help the most people. Where in school, we don't get that. And you're just like not judged. There's not right and wrong, and they smile a lot. Like teachers, my teachers, they never smile. They just stand there.
That's what my
Yeah.
teacher said. She said, you're not allowed to be happy.
Yeah. They never smile. Like, could you at least give me a smile, please? Yeah.
Brilliant.
Let's go again.
I think especially with like if you're really wanting to hear our opinions, it's important to talk with us and not at us. Especially like how Arden was saying in school, it's a very judgmental environment, and even though school and all that has told you, yeah, you're allowed to have your own opinions, they're also kind of like, but this is what your opinions should be. And that can be like difficult as well. And obviously, like coming on to another like thing entirely, it's like like all four young people here are very much top of the class, kind of higher people. Like you two are head girls, aren't you? Yeah, and like me and Arden have always been like the A+ students, and I think that's quite a like a small-minded way to come at it, because obviously we might have similar like experiences in schools and things like that, because we shouldn't be expected to speak about like punishments and things like that in schools and what could be different if we're not the type of people who receive punishments often. And it can also be like there can be a lot of opinionated people who are really, really shy, and so like obviously I was like nominated for this, so it's the teachers aren't going to nominate someone that they think doesn't speak as much. And like obviously like the problem children as well, they're just obviously thought of as they're just going to mess around when really they could have some really, really good opinions that just like are overlooked.
Absolutely. There's so much. Now you see why I've got the best job in the world, is that I get to surround myself with amazing young human rights defenders and all the time. But I know that we're out of time for this bit of it. So thanks so much to all four of you. And I think that so many of the points that you've made, I think will come up in the next discussion as well. I think you're going to join us for the discussion too. So I'll pass back to you now, Domenico, but they'll be back.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bruce, Bo, Omima, as well as Daisy and Arden for your precious contribution. And I don't know how you do it. I mean, I have barely started talking in public, and I'm 33, so I don't know how you prepared, and clearly you've shared with us some very, very interesting and insightful points that we'll all take home or in Ballet Wilson and wherever it is with us. To finish, we're running a bit out of time, but it is important to also hear from children that live the work of UN human rights mechanisms from a little further away. And it is a great pleasure, and I think we have solved the technical issue. We have here with us today, albeit online, Mahmoud, who's the president of the Children's Forum Network of Sierra Leone, and together with Esther, who is a colleague from Plan International Sierra Leone. Let's see if we can see the video. Esther, could you try and speak just to see whether we can hear you, or Mahmoud?
Yes, hello.
Hello, Mahmoud. How are you? How's things?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Very well, loud and clear. Just as a word of introduction, the Geneva Human Rights Platform, together with a number of stakeholders, we have started a series of pilot projects on trying to see how treaty body sessions in member states could work. So we started our collaboration with Mahmoud and as well as Mariam. I believe Mariam is also in the room, the former president of the Children's Forum Network of Sierra Leone. And in that occasion, we had the chance to pilot a session of different treaty bodies in Freetown, Sierra Leone. So that's how we first, collaborated with the Plan International in Freetown. And Mahmoud, I would have a quick question for you, if you could essentially elaborate a bit on the expectations that you have, as well as the barriers that you've encountered in accessing the UN human rights system.
Okay, thank you so very much. It's a pleasure joining you. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me now.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Of course, child participation is not just a right, it's the fourth principle of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which means it's something that is very, very important. But we are seeing this right not considered as important as it's supposed to be, because if you look into the UN system, when we talk about participation, it's not just about inviting a child, come here, speak, and at the end of the day, there is no follow-up of what the child spoke about, and there is no action. So the expectation for participation generally in the UN system, I think there is 4 factors that must be considered. Space, where the children will participate. I mean, this can be in the form of a parliament, in a child-friendly environment where children can be safe, they can be free, and they can be relaxed to make any input that they wants to do. And we can also think around the audience. I think if participation of children can be considered important, then they must have an audience to listen to this participation, because children have a lot to say. But one thing that the UN mechanism also failed to recognize is that children below 10 years and children above 10 years are of different categories. And also children with disabilities are also different categories. So you cannot consider a child below 10 years. They cannot do vocal contribution, but maybe through arts, through crafts, they can make their own contribution. And those above 10, maybe 15, 16 can be vocal, they can speak and contribute. So these 2 things need to be considered. But what we see more generally is whenever there is need for child participation, we just look out for the most brilliant among the children, and because they can speak, we bring them forward and they have these podiums to articulate. But without recognizing that those also who cannot even speak but can perform through art has a lot more contribution. So coming to the barriers that children face here in Sierra Leone and Africa in general, and maybe more extensively the UN general mechanisms, one thing that I found, like I spoke earlier, the age difference is one, disability, because children with disability needs special needs so that they can be able to participate, because they have lots more things. They are more vulnerable. Children are vulnerable, but those with disabilities are much more vulnerable. So allowing these people to participate will, I think, will go a very long way. Of course, the Child Rights Committee has been doing a lot in allowing children to participate. I remember the Geneva team was here in 2021 in December, where the civil society organization also have been playing a key role. They bring together children so that they can participate in the issues of children when it comes to the mechanism of the UN. And one other barrier that I also think around is the political willingness to allow children to participate, because it is the political system that makes up the UN. But if the government of specific countries are not allowing the children to participate, then I think the chance will not be that effective. Let's just look at the alternate report mechanism of the child rights committees. Here in Sierra Leone, the government are yet to approve the alternative reporting mechanism, which allows children to report directly to the treaty bodies. So this means there are lots of barriers. Maybe there is something around it that we don't know. But if the political willingness is there, I think it will be very easy that children can participate directly in the work of UN. And the other barrier that I think of also is less knowledge on the UN mechanism. Of course, there are lots of, I think there is an online platform where children can learn around the Child Rights Committee, but we have other UN bodies also, human rights bodies that children need to learn about too, because we have the UN Special Representative, which I think one of their responsibilities is about protecting children from violence. So these are bodies that children need to learn from, and these are committees that need to report directly to children on what they've been doing so far, because over the years, we've been seeing, they just come into these conferences, give lots of statistics, or we have involved children in this consultation, 700 of them or 7,000 of them, like mentioned earlier, but the action taken of what these children speak about is not actually, we've not been seeing that effective. So these are a couple of barriers that I have identified as my work so far as a child activist and the president of the Children's Forum Network.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mahmoud. And if the room could join me in thanking Mahmoud for... I know that it's been a bit of a bit of a struggle to get connected, but this, I think, might also be an added barrier, right? In order to be closer to the mechanisms that are based here in Geneva. So we are a bit late, but we have now concluded the panel as such. So it is now time for some questions. I'd prefer perhaps to give precedence to the children in the room and to the youth representatives here. If you have any questions to any of the panelists, please do so. And for the adults in the room, if you have questions, please direct the questions to the adults on the panel, if that is possible. I say questions, but of course also comments. I know that there are some representatives from different organizations and that are here. So the floor is of course open. I know that there are some questions from the chat online, and Felix Kirchmeier, the executive director of the Geneva Human Rights Platform, is here helping us with that in case there are questions. There aren't any questions right now from the floor, but let's see if... Yes, I can see Mona from UPR Info. Yes, there was no eyesight invitation there, right? There was no... Yes, please, Mona.
No, thank you. And thank you to... Stand up so you can see me better. My name is Mona Vitay. I'm the director from UPR Info, and it was very inspiring to hear all of you, Mina, Arden, and Daisy. So thank you for sharing with us, also for the online with us. Just wanted to say that at UPR Info we have been working with Child Rights Connect also to support children participation in the Universal Periodic Review, and we have developed a guide on children participation in the UPR. We also supporting children participating in the pre-session before, in fact, the Universal Periodic Review, and so we like also to hear also from those here youth and children, if you have heard about the Universal Periodic Review, if you have been consulted by your state to participate in the process. And one thing I want to say, it's really important that really to see the participation not only in terms of drafting the report or participating in the pre-session, but really what is happening after, in fact, those review, how you can help, in fact, because once recommendations are made either by the different committees from treaty bodies or after the UPR working group session, how you can continue, in fact, to be engaged, in fact, by promoting the right that has been raised in the recommendation that has been made. I think children can really play an important role, not only by monitoring, but also in terms of raising awareness about the issues that are affecting the right and really make your voice heard. And this is what we are really trying to do at UPR Info, to make your voice heard and that you can speak directly, in fact, about issues that are directly affecting you. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. Perhaps we can go across the room for some questions and then we'll get back to the panel, if that's okay. Yes, please, yes.
This is more for my colleagues from C in Scotland. I'm a member of the Non-Aligned Assembly. I just want to know, how would you, if you could, allow children to have more active role in the legislative process for laws coming through both to the Scottish Parliament and the British Parliament?
Perfect, thank you so much. So increased role in the legislative process nationally. Yes, perfect. Thank you so much.
Do any of you want to?
I think maybe that adults are responsible for making sure that we are, so they should be actively involving us, like actively going out of their way to ask young people in different situations with different backgrounds, with different experiences, because honestly it's their responsibility to be like helping us and giving us ways to be involved in that.
I think the key part of it is that young people won't involve themselves because they don't feel that there's a space at the table created for them. So that's the responsibility of the UK and Scottish Government to invite young people to do so. So whether that's inviting us to do consultations or inviting us to lead consultations and gather the views of young people, or whether that's them actually coming in, taking training, hiring experts on youth participation to come in and teach them how to do it properly, then I think that's probably the best strategy.
Yeah, I would say as well, I think it's so important that not only are we bringing children into these spaces, but we're making these spaces ones that suit children and young people, because these are very intimidating adult forums, and I think if we want to bring children into them, we need to look at them and make changes so that they are suitable environments for children.
So for younger children, like primary school age, it can be quite, they often can't articulate their opinions well, because they've just not learned how to speak. Like, I'm still stuttering over my words and I'm 14. Like, how are 6-year-olds meant to express their opinions? So I think it's about finding ways where everybody can collaborate together, whether that's through like arts and crafts or something like that, or exercises where kids can get their opinions across.
And if I could jump in.
Oh, of course, yes, no, we're on this one, yes, please.
Absolutely, I think you're powerfully hearing the importance of involvement. One of the things in Scotland is that we're in the process of incorporating the Convention on the Rights of the Child into domestic law, so bringing this international law into our domestic law, and in that law that we're creating, there's going to be a requirement on government to be able to show that they've involved children and young people, and so through use of things like impact assessments, but through kind of structural processes are really important, locking that into law, that requirement to fulfil the obligation. So the obligation exists already through the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but it is quite important to lock into law some of the processes that help that happen and then build capacity around it. And so I think, again, the work that's happening with the Northern Irish Youth Assembly and the Youth Parliament and others in terms of trying to get some of the structural change, I think is quite important, as well as the cultural change.
Thanks a lot. Here we go. Yes, perhaps we take some other questions. We do have the point on the UPR as well. There's a gentleman at the back. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Chris Quinn, Northern Ireland Youth Forum. And first of all, thanks so much for your inputs, especially the young people. Feel really inspired. But I wanted just to press the buttons around the process. Because of her, Daisy just spoke there about how we as adults bring young people into our arena. And we're sitting today in a formal arena. Before we came here, we were denied access to Paddy Wilson, which is the centre of all things children's rights over the next 2 days. So us as a group of, well, I'm not a young person, but the young people from Northern Ireland were denied access and we had to do a bit of arguing. So I'm really interested in the conversation about young people talking about 1 minute to represent the views of an entire nation. We had conversations within the youth forum about tokenism and how it feels. It's very special to bring young people here, but I'm really drawn upon how we really change the landscape. How do we bring adult decision makers into a floor space, into a play space, to listen, to feel, to hear, to act. And I just wonder, is that a romantic pipe dream of mine, or are there ways for everyone in this room to try and affect that system change, whereby young people's voices and children's voices are part of the fabric, as opposed to this bolt-on to what we're trying to do. So I don't know if that's a statement or a question, but I have been inspired by what I've heard today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any other children? Or yes? Oh yes, please.
So I'm Genevieve, I'm from Northern Ireland Youth Forum. I just want to ask any of the adults on the panel, just how will we as young people know that what we say tomorrow will be accepted and taken in by our government or lack thereof, and be made steps for change?
Brilliant. Yes. And one more question, and then perhaps we pass to the floor. Yes. Any other point? Yes.
Yeah, just to kind of play off Chris's point there with tokenism. How would you go about removing tokenism from the youth sphere? I know especially when Northern Ireland, due to our lack of government, the Youth Assembly is extremely tokenistic, as it has an inability to actually carry out its core purpose. How would you go about removing that as a whole from the youth sector?
Very good. Okay, so let's start perhaps from Raggy. There's a few questions, a few comments, any reactions from you. We'll pass them to Eli and then Ilaria, and then we'll have a second round of questions.
How much time do we have?
It's 10 minutes till the end of the event, but perhaps if you can... yes.
I just want to say that I was fascinated by what the children said from Scotland, and in fact it sort of underlined my basic belief on the prerequisite for child participation, and that is awareness of individual rights. If a child does not have an awareness of the child's rights, there is no hope in that child being involved in any participation processes. And that's why we need to focus our work in child participation on educating children, helping them to get information, access to reliable information, and supporting them in that process. Now, I was fascinated by this question, the gentleman over there who spoke about the tokenism, and this has been a cause of great concern of us in the committee. We only have, for example, tomorrow an hour with these children from Scotland. And if you come to think about it, it's absolutely ridiculous. But it is not, though. I can assure you, it is extremely important. Because when you meet people like young people and children like them, you get the sense of what's on their heart, not only intellectually, but emotionally, and as more sort of fully as human beings. The committee has only once met outside of Pali Wilson, and that was in 2020. We went to the Samoa in the Pacific Ocean. It was as far away from Geneva as you could possibly come. And we met children from the whole region of Samoa, totally different culture. And this gave us a new insight, a new dimension in our work. Now, by the way of concluding, there is a change now in which the treaty bodies are doing their monetary business. We are implementing what is called simplified procedure. I don't know if you have any knowledge of it, but what it means really that the circle, monitoring circle, will be 8 years with a follow-up in between after 4 years, right? And there is a talk about the follow-up being in the respective states that we are going to monitor. And I am hoping that this will give us an increased opportunity to meet children. I was very disappointed when I received an email from Bruce last year inviting me to Scotland, and I was about responding, of course, when can I come? But then it was pointed out to me that there is a rule in the committee that members are not allowed to visit countries that are coming up under monitoring or state review. So I was not allowed, but maybe after this week, after the monitoring, I have the chance. Well, anyway, I've been in Scotland and Northern Ireland as well, quite a number of times. But anyway, this is really a great issue for concern and food for thought. How can we strengthen this? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Thank you. Perhaps, yes, we'll come back. Yeah? Yes, perfect. Yes.
Yeah. So, some reflections and trying to also respond to some of the questions from the room, but also from the chat that I managed to more or less read. I would like not to discourage us all, but to remind ourselves that we are in a context, the UN context, where the space for civil society is shrinking overall for all. Okay, not only children, but also adults, like anyone really from civil society. We are very concerned, for example, of a decision by the conference services in Geneva, recent decision to stop providing official interpretation to meetings with remote participants. This is just to give you an idea of the context in which we are, where we're talking about civil society participation in the UN. And this is happening after, praising, years and years of praising, the good results and good improvements brought by the pandemic with the expansion of online participation and so on and so forth. We are going back to the pre-COVID, to the in-person meetings settings from mid-2023. So basically the September pre-sessions will only be in-person pre-sessions or without official UN interpretation. So this is just to say that this is the context. We can say that participation is tokenistic for all, therefore, as well. We have seen a lot of instances where as NGOs, as adult civil society participants, completely had a meaningless participation in many of the UN processes. But this cannot discourage us. We need to turn things around and keep pushing together, but keep pushing for child participation in a pragmatic and strategic way. We can't just ask something that we know from the start it will not be possible to achieve, within a reasonable time frame. Again, considering this context. I'm reading about, how the UN can reach out to children in very vulnerable situations, refugees, children in conflict with the law, humanitarian. I mean, there is no strategy, there is nothing in place in the UN system that tells the UN entities how to outreach with these groups in a systematic and overarching way. There's not a policy, there is not a UN-wide approach or procedure to child participation, never mind about child participation of specific groups. This has been an ask that Child Rights Connect has been put forward from some time. It's something that we would like to see coming up, and I want to conclude by giving a bit of hope to ourselves, because the guidance note from the Secretary General that Bragi was talking about earlier on child rights mainstreaming, this is going to be Guterres telling the whole UN system how the UN entities should apply a child rights approach in a systematic way in whatever they do. So we have been asking, children have been asking already that this guidance note talks about child participation and also asks for something else, that it's not just a document with blah blah on child participation, but it's a document that can trigger additional actions or resources on child participation. So I want to finish with this and with putting this on your radar. Please watch out the draft, this guidance note, the draft will be published very soon, and we will be able, as civil society, as children and part of the movement, we will be able to comment on the draft, to share what we think in terms of, are there gaps? So it's a unique opportunity. It's a train that we cannot miss if we want to move things forward on child participation in the UN. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. We have, we're almost done with the time, but if I don't know if Bragi might have to go to back to the committee soon, but if it's okay with you all to continue for another 5 minutes, we have 2 more questions from the floor, and I think Bo wished to reply also to some of the questions.
It was in response to the man at the back. I think obviously I can only talk on a Scottish perspective, but I think it's key that decision makers prioritise protecting our rights in law and protecting the UNCRC in law, because otherwise all the progress we've made can just go in an instant. It's possible for it to go in an instant, and it's important that you protect it by law so that we have that there to refer to when we're like, no, you're not respecting our rights. This is in law, you have to respect this. So I think that's just something to consider.
Thank you so much, Bo. So we have a question from the gentleman up here and also gentleman at the back, and then after that we will close with perhaps some final remarks. Oh, yours sounded very much like final remarks, but we'll just have to go back very quickly for some last sentences. Yes, please. Yes,
Keith Borgeswood, the president of the UK National Secular Society. Just very briefly to touch 2 difficult issues that can blight children's rights, and I've very rarely heard them talked about. I was impressed how Bo and Daisy both talked about diversity, and I would like both the youth and children here and the adults to think about whether enough is done for children of minority sexualities. I don't think it is. And also, even more shoved under the carpet, children who are being abused, whether it's thoroughly or not. And there's an awful lot of that, I'm afraid, and this destroys these kids' lives. And we must, I think, be a bit braver, all of us, in coming up from below and dealing with it around the committee table. I'm sorry that was difficult, but I'm sorry, I just had to say it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And yes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Jérôme Daillon-Jouin. I'll say a few words about how I'm coming to this discussion. First, as a former diplomat of the European Union, I've spent a number of years in the UN Human Rights Council negotiating on behalf of the EU. And the issue of the participation of all stakeholders is an issue, and we've just heard how difficult it is. And what I've tried to do since I left the European Union is to try to reflect with a group of people how we can move towards much more inclusive negotiations, so that inclusiveness is not just a buzzword, but that really we break away from the format of negotiations as we have now. Difficult, but there's work in progress, and I think, to give a ray of hope, I think with the new technologies, we can, if there is enough push and incentives, make progress. I also come to the discussion with the hat of a father. My daughter last year decided to write a letter to governments on plastic pollution. She wrote that letter, and then immediately I shared it with a couple of people in international organizations. First reaction I had was, you should maybe change the format, the style, to direct, whatever. And that's where I felt, and I think that's what also you conveyed, if we are serious about participation of children and youth in general, it means we have to take the words, the writing as it is, and not trying to change the format, not trying to, which leads me also to a space which I think you've touched upon, which is being creative about the formats of participation. And I think one exercise I did recently, I was invited to speak at a summit on digital diplomacy and governance. And there was this exercise to project ourselves in 2032, so 10 years from now, 9 years from now. And I wrote this as a message to my daughter, as a projection of how I would like to see everything that we discussed in 10 years from now. And I think I would end maybe with this proposal, which is, we know the limitations, we know how difficult it is, we know there will be pushback from many quarters. But if we are creative, if we project ourselves, if each of us here were just trying to imagine what it could be to be a child in 2033, and the space that you would have, the ways you would have to communicate, to press, to influence, not only to speak, but to influence and to have an impact, I think that could also trigger new ways of thinking out of the box. And that's what we need today, because I think we're locked in formats that we've inherited from the past. And I think creation is out there in our brain, and will be helped, I believe, also with new technologies.
Thank you so much. Thank you for such insightful last points, and for raising some very important issues for the committee and other mechanisms to take on with stronger force, perhaps. So this, brings us to the end of the Q&A, and very soon to the panel. Apologies for the many questions that have been posed in the chat. We will collect them and share the questions with the panelists. I just wish to mention, sort of shout out to Ms. Diarra Diop, as well as the other two authors of the Together We Decide report by Save the Children. Thank you for being here, and apologies for not replying to your questions live, let's say, or comments, of course. But perhaps we go back as a very 10-second, 15-second remarks from this side, from Team Scotland, and then we finish with Ilaria and Bradley. Yes, just a reflection from Bruce or Bo or Mima, whoever we can just...
I'm going to take this person. Yeah. Give me a second to think. Did you want to go now? Go now.
I really liked your question about how children can access help and how minorities are represented, and I think it's something that isn't represented enough. Often in schools, culture isn't celebrated, or if it is culture, it's from Scottish culture, which is good to celebrate, but especially at my school, we have loads of diversity, and it's often not looked at. And I think it's up to schools to put in place systems where people from minorities are represented, and to have places where children can get help, because often it's quite intimidating to try and ask for help. Something that happens at my school is people wear lanyards, and then they've had training, to go and talk to them about it if you are having trouble at home or with school. And I think that's something that other schools would benefit at too. Yeah, so just to respond to the points about diversity and also about participation as a whole, which I think were so important to raise, so thank you for that. I think I've touched on how it's been challenging, to balance coming here with everything else that we have in our lives, but I think I certainly am in a position of immense privilege to have parents that are incredibly supportive of me, to have an environment which is safe and encourages me to speak out and to do things like this. And for children that don't have that, this is impossible, or as near as impossible as you can get. And if you want to hear those voices, you need to go to them, because it's not safe for them to come to places like this when they can't speak out safely. But if you come to them, that is how you hear those voices. So.
I really like the comment about directness from I think it was over here, and how a lot of people are especially people in government are taken aback or reluctant to be shown any sort of directness. I think I've always been a fairly blunt person, which can sometimes be mistaken as rudeness, but I've always felt like if I see something that needs to be changed and it's not being changed with politeness or sugarcoating it, then the best way to see the results that I want is to be blunt and straightforward and direct about it. But like I said, people can find that rude or disrespectful when really it's not. It's just I'm trying to get a reaction out of someone, and no one's giving me a reaction if I'm being polite about it.
I think both the points made are very important, particularly the making sure you have diversity and making sure you're doing it in a child-friendly format. And I think the only way you can do that is going into spaces where children are. You should want to listen to children. We're a valuable resource to decision makers. We have lots of opinions that are quite outside the box but can help you change the perspective of the way your business or company or organisation or governing body runs. And you should want to listen to that, but in order to do that you need to go where children are, and you need to go where diverse groups of children are as well. So I, for instance, I'm visually impaired, and that's obviously caused things, and I've been in hospital and things. So you need to look at different ways of doing things. So going into hospitals, because hospitalised young people won't have the opportunity to go into school to feed back their opinions to decision makers. You need to target lots of very niche kind of places and people, and you need to target them and not just expect them to come to you, because young people don't have the power to do that because they've not been given that for their entire life, basically.
Thank you. And very, very quickly, because I know we're out of time, but I think it's important that meaningful participation is fundamental to effective and legitimate decision-making. So if we're not doing meaningful participation, the decision-making isn't legitimate. And that's particularly true for those whose rights are most at risk. And so when we start to use money as an excuse, this is one of the things that we have recommendations to state. We're supposed to use available resources to the maximum extent possible. We should be prioritising funding towards the participation of rights holders and children, and particularly children who are most at risk. And that does mean getting out into communities. It does mean engaging with children in ways that actually work for them in creative ways. And when we do that, not only is it more legitimate and effective, it's actually fun, and it goes back to smiling. And actually, we're allowed to have fun in this difficult work that we do. And as soon as you see serious decision makers engaging with really good participation, they get it very quickly, because not only is it effective and creates legitimacy, but it's also really fun.
I think the more decisions are tested as well, the more successful the decision is that ends up being made. So the more you try something and actively look for opinions against it, the more good the final decision ends up being as well. So.
Thank you very much. Yes, and so very briefly, thank you.
Yes, one example and one recommendation on maybe getting child participation in the UN in a different way. We have been pushing states to give up their speaking slots at the Human Rights Council and give it to children. We can't have additional space for children. Let's call on states, on diplomats to give their speaking slots to children. And it has worked. Nobody would have believed that a few years ago, but we have managed to convince a few states, and you will see in this year Annual Day on the Rights of the Child on digital environment, there will be quite a lot of states, so please watch out. And you know, it's something that we can all together continue to push as a practice. Plus, we have been doing the same with NGOs, you know, a bit of self-criticism as well, you know. NGOs should be more and more courageous, you know, to also give away their own space to children. And then one recommendation, because we heard so much about, you know, bringing the UN closer to children on the ground. Just a recommendation to explore the special procedures of the Human Rights Council much more. We know that there is very little child participation examples still with these mechanisms, but these mechanisms cover and work on many, many themes that are relevant to you and to children's rights. And so just a recommendation, you know, to really try to explore new mechanisms as well.
Thank you. Just a couple of words on inclusion. I felt it was extremely important topic in the end. We have done quite well in terms of mapping aspects that impact obstacles for children to be participant in the process. But I think we have still a long, long way to go. Just think about all the children who are brought up in families low in warmth, that are constantly reminded that they are insufficient, they are no good. How can we expect these kids to come into our spaces and express themselves? These questions are extremely important for us to find better ways to approach vulnerable children wherever they are and to include them in our debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Bragi. Thank you so much. And just as a quick, I can see that, yes, we have Mahmoud and Esther. If you have a quick recommendation, perhaps to close this event.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I have a very quick recommendation. Of course, the participation of children in the work of UN is very important because children should be considered as partners because ourselves, we have lots of things to input so that we can achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. I think we have few time more to get there. So what I'm recommending is this idea of the Children's Parliament. Of course, it's something that will surely help to see that children are get together in all the countries around the world. But it's sad to see just few of the countries, not everywhere, have adopted the Children's Parliament. Some do have children's networks, but I think the parliaments can give more voices to these children than the network. So that's a recommendation I think the Child Rights Committee should consider, and also the alternative reports mechanisms. The one that does deal with children to report directly to the Child Rights Committee. I think that one is the most important because you cannot trust what the government gives always, but when the children themselves participate in the reporting directly to the treaty bodies, I think you can know better than what if they are reported on behalf of them. So this is the recommendation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mahmoud. Thank you, Esther. And this brings our conversation to an end a little later than expected. Apologies for that. Thank you, all panelists, above all Arden and Mima, from the Children's Parliament, Daisy and Bo from the Scottish Youth Parliament, as well as, of course, the accompanying adults, because behind children participating, there is, of course, a whole plethora of colleagues. So Ronan, Katie, Matt, as well as, of course, Bruce and Gina. And well, above all, I've been dealing mostly with Jules and Jackie from Together, Scottish Alliance for Children's Rights. So thank you so much for facilitating the children participation to this. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our newsletter, and we'll be posting future human rights conversations in the weeks to come. Thanks a lot. Thank you. bit longer again.